All right, everybody. Today we're going to pick up where we left off and look at productivity. So usually in class we would have a couple different activities to kind of demonstrate this, but we're just going to have to kind of make do with what we have. All right, so when we look at productivity in this class, we're going to look at it as the relationship of inputs to outputs. And so just to kind of maybe make a little bit more sense, we do this game in class where I ask the kids to make these little books. We call them widgets and pajamas. All right, and so last week we did this, and I had a group of 4 students that made $100 worth of books, and I had a group of 5 students that made $100 worth of books. All right, and so together they made the most money, but I ended up giving the candy to the winners, which would be the group of 4. All right, so think about it this way. If a group of 4 can make $100 worth of books, all right, then each worker is making about $25. All right, whereas if a group of 5 makes $100, that means each worker is making about $20 for their company. And so because of that, the most productive group would have been the one with the fewer people because they made the same amount. So productivity is just looking at the relationship of inputs to outputs. So if I'm a business, I can try to become more productive in 2 ways. I can either try to lower down my costs, or I can try to increase my profits. All right, and so if you look at the King and Prince on St. Simon's as a good example of this. So I worked at this hotel for several years, and you see a couple different things as they try to make more money. First off is they try to cut costs wherever they can, right? Whether it's hiring younger employees to work out in the restaurant, whether it's getting cheaper ingredients for food or anything like that, that's lowering down their costs. On the other side of things, they could try to raise their revenue, right? But let's look at the downside of that. If they tried to raise the cost of a room there, it would probably lower down the demand for that room. Fewer people would want to rent out that room, and so that could hurt their bottom line. So they would much rather lower down the inputs than increase the outputs. So productivity is just looking at this balance, this relationship of inputs to outputs. Same thing with like a fast food place, right? So chances are after a dinner rush is over, your manager, if you work at a restaurant, has probably asked you if anybody wants to go home. And the reason they're doing that is because they realize the output's not going to be that high for the rest of the night. So what they can do to save money is lower down their inputs, have fewer people working, that way they're not spending as much money. All right, so other things that they can do to try to increase this productivity is to specialize, right? Get specific people better at specific tasks. And we talked about this with the school already. All right, but chances are, like those of you that do work, chances are whenever you started at your job, your manager might have tried you in a couple different positions. So whenever I was in high school, I worked at a Papa John's. And so they started me out on the phones, then they put me on the prep station, and then they put me on the dough slinging part, and then I worked on the oven, right? And they saw which part of it I was best at, and then let me just focus on that. And so like for me, I was really good at taking orders, I was good with the phones, and so that's primarily what I did. All right, so I was able to specialize and get better and better at these tasks. Now the downside of that though is when something would happen, like let's say that the person that makes the pizza would have to go home sick, and I'd have to do that instead. Well, I wasn't really as good at that. I wasn't as productive as that. So specialization allows us to get really good at individual tasks, but it doesn't really let us get good at a lot of different things. And so for me now, like I would be very bad at hunting or growing my own food. I'd be very bad at fixing my own truck or building my own house. Because I specialize in teaching, I haven't really worked as hard on these things, and so I'm not as productive at them. But there's other people that specialize in just working on cars, or people that just specialize in building houses, and so they're very good at these things. All right, so when we look at investment in this class, all right, we're looking at anytime you give up something in the short term with the expectation that you'll make more in the future. All right, and so we'll look at investment primarily in the forms of money, right? Ways that you can invest your money in order to give it up in the short term with the expectation that it'll be worth more in the future. And so some examples that we'll look at in here, I've got a few savings bonds for my nephew. That's money that I put into a special account for him that gains interest over time, and whenever he gets older, he can cash in on that. I've got money in a savings account, which has a very low interest rate. I've got money in stocks that might gain or lose value over time. The expectation, though, is that if I'm taking that money out of my checking account now and using it for that purpose, I'm expecting that in the long run, I'm going to get more money back out of that. Otherwise, I would just keep it in my checking account. But investment can be more than just money. All right, the biggest thing you could do to invest in yourself now is in skills. It could be trade school, it could be going to college, it could be an apprenticeship, but the biggest thing you could do for yourself now is to gain marketable skills. Whether it's learning how to code on a computer or learning how to fix an engine, both of those are profitable skills that can make you money over a long period of time. And so I would say that's the biggest thing you can do for yourself now. All right, capital investment is just when we purchase things to make ourselves more efficient. When you guys decided to do virtual learning, all right, there's a good possibility that maybe you got yourself a new computer, or maybe you got some school supplies for your house. That way you can be more productive at working from home. All right, for the brand new, I guess it's not brand new anymore, but whenever they built the New Brunswick High School, they did a lot of capital investment. All right, they built the hallways of the school twice as large as they were before. They put in these new projectors, which are really nice. They gave us these little manipulative pens that we can use to write with. They gave us these webcams. All of these weren't at the old school. And so they invested a lot of money in order to make your education better. So if they wouldn't have done these things, virtual learning would be pretty much impossible. And so we've kind of lucked out that they invested in this, because now we can still give you a good education. All right, so if we're looking at increasing productivity, like let's say from a business standpoint, there's a couple things that contribute to this, right? And so it's like whenever I have, applied to different positions before, whether it was through teaching, whether it was at restaurants, or whether it was at hotels, the biggest thing that employers are concerned about is your work ethic, right? Are you willing to learn how to do a job? Are you consistent in being there on time every day? Are you reliable? And so that work ethic will take you a lot further than just pure ability alone. Even within my own classroom, I see that a lot of times, that it's not always the smartest kid that does the best on the test or that gets the highest grade in the class. Very often the smartest kid maybe might be a little bit lazy. It doesn't do so well in the class because of that. But it's the kid that has a good work ethic and is willing to figure out what they don't know, willing to ask the right questions, that increases their productivity. All right, we talked a little bit about specialization as well. Again, you're dividing up different tasks and everyone's getting good at those individual tasks. All right, so technology lowers the costs and increases the productivity of business. Think about Walmart for this, right? For every self-checkout counter they have, that's one fewer cashier that they have to pay per hour. All right, and so that technology lowers down their bottom line and lets them produce their groceries for cheaper. All right, and then finally is this education and training, right? So whenever I decided to become a teacher, I had to commit to at least 4 years of education for teaching, and I decided to add an extra 2 on top of that. But I think that those 6 years made me a much better teacher than I would have been if I would have gone into teaching immediately outside of high school. I wouldn't have been prepared for it. I would have been a terrible teacher. But that education and training and the skills that I built over those 6 years made me a much better teacher than I was before. It increased my productivity. The same way that if you look at most new teachers really struggle their first year because it's hard to transition those concepts of college into the reality. And I'm sure that applies to other positions as well, whether you are a fireman or you work on computers or you're a lawyer. I'm sure that first year is difficult for everybody as you figure out how to apply this training. All right, so I want to watch a short video real quick. If it doesn't show up well, I'll post a link to it on the Google Classroom as well. But let's go ahead and take a look at this, kind of looking at productivity in a different way.
Today during my office hours, when not in the office, actually here at my house in front of the refrigerator, I'd like to talk about the concept of efficiency, which an economist would refer to as trying to do something at the lowest possible cost. Which of course makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you can do something at a low cost, then you free up other resources and you're able to use those in other capacities. To show you an example that's a little bit offbeat, but I think it proves the point better than looking at cost curves actually. I'm trying to figure out what I want to drink here today. Just look inside the refrigerator. So I'm going to have some tea, got some milk, got Yingling, we got some lemonade, dairy punch, water, we've got Diet Coke, we've got some orange juice. We're over here, we've got some wine and some cherry Dr. Pepper. So, it kind of decided on the berry punch. And this berry punch is almost empty. So I could do what most people would do. They could take the berry punch, I could get a cup, you could pour it into the glass, at which point I could then enjoy the berry punch. And at some point, once I was done with this, I could put this into the sink and eventually work its way to the dishwasher. And when we cleaned, I could put it back on the shelf, which is all fine and good. That's what most people do. But I'd like to suggest to you that when something is almost done, in this case the berry punch, that my choice shouldn't be to always go and place it in glass, because that's more costly, but rather to drink right from the garden. That was good. And now it's gone. So all I have to do is I have to take that carton and I have to dispose of it. That's going to take me a lot less time than putting it in the glass, breaking it, cleaning it up, and then returning it to the cabinet. And what do I still have? Well, I've still got the empty carton. So if you want to save time, you want to think about efficiency, businesses do a very good job with this. And I think sometimes our social customs prevent people from making efficient choices in their lives. For instance, one way that we might think of efficiency is people always hang their coat up. If you do, fine, that's great. But maybe there are times when you'd be better off just leaving the coat on the back of the sofa for a little while. You're just going to be in and out of the house quickly. That's the idea behind efficiency. I hope this has been helpful. And I'll get a great day.
All right, guys, so y'all heard it first here. So if your parents are upset about you drinking out of the milk carton again, or the orange juice container or whatever else, as long as the container is close to empty, it's the most efficient thing to do, right? Why get a glass out, dirty it with just the last little bit of orange juice if you're just going to throw it away again anyway? You can send your parents angry complaints to me if you want about that. So let's go and switch over to the Google Meet. We'll talk about this a little bit together, talk about the activity for the day, and see you guys in a minute.